Good afternoon. This is Crystal Jackson with ARC. Here today to share with you an update on the Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan. While we're still waiting for a few people to join us, please be sure to do the things on the screen while you wait, and we'll get started momentarily. Thank you. All right, thank you for waiting, and thank you for joining us today for the second stakeholder webinar update for the Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan, otherwise known as the MACAP. Today, during this hour, we will give a brief overview of the Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan. We will give an update on several of the plan elements that we've gotten underway so far, talk about next steps, and then have a chance for some question and answers at the end of the hour. So let's get started. Just a reminder that the Atlanta Regional Commission is the lead agency that is doing the Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan, otherwise known as the Atlanta MSA, Comprehensive Climate Action Plan under the EPA grant. And this process meets several of our goals at ARC, as well as our mission for fostering thriving communities for all within the Atlanta region through collaborative, data-informed planning and investments. So to recap the Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan, Some of you may be familiar with this, but this is part 3 out of a 4-part process over 4 years from a grant called the Climate Pollution Reduction Planning Grant provided to us through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We submitted a priority climate action plan on March 1st of this year. Several local governments, ARC and others, submitted implementation grant proposals based upon measures in that priority climate action plan in April of this year. And beginning in August of this year, we began the next deliverable, which is a more comprehensive climate action plan. And this is a plan that you would think of as a traditional climate action plan, which looks at near and long-term greenhouse gas emission reduction goals and prioritizes measures to achieve those goals. And that plan is due actually by December 2025, but our goal is to deliver that plan to EPA by this time next year. And then towards the end of the grant, 4-year grant, we will be doing a status report to EPA, and that will be due late summer of 2027. And the Atlanta MSA, which is the geography for this Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan, is 29 counties, 150 cities. That's the entire area that's outlined in black on the screen. You'll see some counties outlined in red. That is the ARC's 11 county traditional service area. And then the kind of grayish blue shading are 20 counties within the Atlanta ARC Metropolitan Planning Organization area. So we are working slightly outside of the boundaries that we typically work within at ARC, but we are happy to broaden our reach and work with our neighbors in the other regional commission areas. The timeline, we are at our October stakeholder meeting, so about, we'll say halfway through, because these meetings will extend through June of next year. But we are on our second stakeholder meeting, and we'll have a stakeholder meeting every other month through next spring. We will be talking about the first 2 requirements of the plan today, which are to develop a greenhouse gas inventory and develop greenhouse gas projections and targets. And just so you know, again, we're working towards having this finalized in August next year with an adoption by the ARC board and submission to EPA in October of next year. And to switch into the updates of the plan components, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Shelby Miller, who is a senior data analyst in our Natural Resources Department at ARC.
Thank you, Crystal, and good afternoon, everyone. So we'll start this update by looking at the greenhouse gas inventory. EPA requirements for the comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory are that it must include all greenhouse gas emissions and sinks by emission source and sink category. The greenhouse gases to cover include carbon dioxide, hydrofluorocarbons, methane, nitrous oxide, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. So EPA is not requiring a specific base year. Today, you will see that we've inventoried greenhouse gas emissions by sector for 2005, but we're still exploring if we'll use this as our base year. But since 2005 is relevant to our greenhouse gas reduction targets, we felt it would be helpful to analyze the emissions data from that year. So next slide. For this inventory, we're using greenhouse gas emissions data from Drawdown Georgia's emissions tracker. The table on the left shows total metric tons of CO2 equivalents by sector for 2005, covering the agriculture, commercial, residential, industrial, and transportation sectors, as well as the natural lands emissions sink. So the gross emissions account for the greenhouse gas emission sources, while the net emissions capture the emission sources and sinks. And then the pie chart to the right of that table shows the percentage of total greenhouse gas emissions by sector for 2005. So you can see that transportation is the largest at 31%, followed by residential, commercial, industrial, and then agriculture. So next slide. So the pie chart on the left of this slide is the same as the previous slide, but the data in that pie chart for the commercial, residential, and industrial sectors include emissions from consumed electricity, we wanted to break that out. So that bar chart on the right provides a more detailed breakdown of emissions for electricity consumption in each of those sectors. And you can see that consumed electricity accounts for 91% of emissions in the commercial sector. That's 81% in the residential sector and 84% in the industrial sector. So our comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory is still a work in progress. Again, we're exploring base years as well as working on inventorying those 6 specific gases. Next slide. All right, so here we'll jump into the greenhouse gas emissions projections. Next slide. EPA is requiring near and long-term projections for a business as usual scenario and a plan implemented scenario. So near term should be forecasted to 2030 to 2035. Long term should be forecasted to 2050. Today, you'll see that we have business as usual scenario near and long-term projections, but we're still working on the plan implemented scenario projections. And while EPA is not requiring sector-based projections, it is strongly encouraged. So we are currently assessing the feasibility of providing sector-based projections in our MOCAP. Next slide. Okay, so business as usual greenhouse gas emissions projections were provided to us by the Drawdown Georgia team. They're based on the Atlanta MSA's shares of the business as usual projections their team performed for the state. Here, we're looking at electricity consumption greenhouse gas emissions. For these projections, the Drawdown Georgia team used the EIA NIMS model that's behind the annual energy outlook. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat to an overview page for NIMS. And if you follow that link, it'll lead you to another link with a detailed description of the model, as well as a link to an assumptions page if you're interested in reading about the assumptions that are baked into that model. So looking at the graph, that vertical dashed line separates data to the left and forecasts to the right. On the forecasted side, greenhouse gas emissions for commercial and residential electricity consumption, so that red and green line, follow a similar pattern where they see a significant decrease between now and 2030, and then they hover around 5 million metric tons until about 2045, and then they see a slight increase by 2050. Greenhouse gas emissions for industrial electricity consumption, so the blue line, drop just below 2.5 million metric tons around 2030, and then show a slight decrease by 2050. And then transportation, which is in the purple line, on the other hand, shows an increase over time in electricity consumption emissions, so which could be contributed to assumptions in the model based on electrification of transportation. So next slide. Here we're looking at business as usual scenario projections for fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions in the commercial, industrial, residential, and transportation sectors. Again, that vertical dashed line separates data to the left and forecasts to the right. You can see that the transportation sector has the highest fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions, showing a decrease through 2035, and then an increase again between 2045 and 2050. And then the fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions forecast for the commercial, residential, and industrial sectors, so those lines at the bottom, follow a similar pattern to each other, showing a very gradual increase from now through 2050. Okay, next slide. All right, here we're looking at the business as usual projections for the agriculture and waste emission sources and the natural land sink. So natural lands on this legend is LUCF, which is land use change forestry. For these sectors, the Drawdown Georgia team downscaled aggregate CO2 values from the U.S. Biennial Report Supplement to the IPCC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So I will drop a link to that report in the chat in case you're interested in reading in more detail where these values were derived. So looking at the graph, there's that vertical line separating data to the left and forecasts to the right. We can see that the waste sector, which is that orangish yellow line at the top, emissions are forecasted to decrease through time, going from just under about 4 million metric tons to 3 million metric tons by 2050. And then the agriculture greenhouse gas emissions is that green line, show a very gradually decrease from now through 2050. And then the natural land sink, which is the purple line at the bottom, increases from now through 2050. So this is where we are on the greenhouse gas emissions projections for the Atlanta MSA. Again, the Drawdown Georgia team prepared these forecasts for us. So if you have any specific questions pertaining to these forecasts that we can't answer today, we're happy to follow up with the Drawdown Georgia team. Next slide. Okay, so next we'll look at the greenhouse gas reduction targets. EPA is requiring economy-wide near and long-term greenhouse gas reduction targets. These targets may be on a net or gross greenhouse gas emissions basis. So if you'll recall from that greenhouse gas inventory slide, the gross emissions only consider the greenhouse gas emission sources, while the net emissions consider both the greenhouse gas sources and sinks. So we will be including natural land sink in our plan, so our targets will be based on net emissions. Targets should be consistent with the U.S.'s formal commitments to reduce emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030 for near term, and then net zero to near net zero by 2050 for long term. And we're saying near net zero emissions here because EPA's recent CPRG workshop for grant recipients that took place in Minnesota last month revealed that while many grant recipients are making progress toward net zero emissions, reaching this goal may require additional strategies that depend on policies or technologies that don't exist yet, such as carbon pricing or advanced carbon capture technologies. The next slide. Okay, so since the near-term target is to reach 50 to 52% below 2005 greenhouse gas emissions, this slide is showing the greenhouse gas emissions in metric tons of CO2 equivalents for 2005 on the left there. In the middle, we're looking at that amount that's 50% below 2005 levels. And then on the right, we're looking at the 2019 5-year average greenhouse gas emissions, just to get an idea of where we're currently tracking. So that 2019 5-year average is 15% below 2005 levels. Next slide. Okay, here we have listed all of the greenhouse gas reduction measures outlined in the Atlanta MSA Priority Climate Action Plan, or PCAP. And if you click one more time, if all of these measures were implemented, we would be 33% below 2005 levels by 2030, considering the low-end range of greenhouse gas reduction potential, or 61% below 2005 levels, considering the high-end range that we have outlined in that plan. So we would exceed that near-term target of 50 to 52% below 2005 levels if we met the high-end range of reduction potential from all measures in our PCAP. Right, next slide. Okay, so this concludes the inventory projections and targets update, and I will now hand it back over to Crystal to give the outreach and engagement update.
Thank you, Shelby. So just a brief moment to talk about our outreach and engagement that we've done so far since August. And you'll see here a map of our low-income and disadvantaged communities in the Atlanta MSA area. This is another data point created by Shelby based upon CGIST and other EPA tools. And you see in the teal area within the orange MSA outline the areas of the MSA that are considered low income and disadvantaged depending upon various metrics. So a large part of the statistical area. And so with that in mind, we are focusing our engagement activities MSA-wide, but we'll be targeting communities and counties that have a high percentage of low-income and disadvantaged communities, otherwise known as LIDACs. We've had a public input website up. You see the URL there since July or August, and that's a one-stop shop for information on the progress with the MCAP, any surveys that might be open at the time. Currently, we have a visioning survey and a climate priorities survey. And then that is where the webinars that are recorded and the presentations are stored, as well as any announcements for upcoming webinars. We've also started tabling at community events this fall. As you know, fall is a great time for festivals here in the Metro Atlanta area. So we've got a list of festivals in counties that we'd like to, again, target for low-income and disadvantaged communities. So far, we've held tabling events in South Fulton and in at Streets Alive, which is Southwest Atlanta, this month. And we'll be later on this month and into next month looking at attending festivals in Douglas County, Newton County, and possibly some others as they come onto our radar. And then we also obviously are holding these stakeholder webinars. So that's currently what we have going on as far as outreach and engagement. Here's some pictures and some results from some of the events that we went to this past weekend. You see we have a kind of a word bubble selfie opportunity for people to pick their favorite climate action or result of climate action and take a picture with it. And so not only are these fun to look at, but we are actually capturing the data from them to get an idea of what people are most interested in seeing as far as measures go. And then on the right, we have a visioning postcard. It's similar to the visioning survey we have online, asking people to share what they think the region will look like in 2050 once we've become a climate and people-friendly region for all. So the one on the top was obviously done by an adult. The one on the bottom was done by a child who said that she likes composting and wants more natural spaces. And there's more to come as we work to continue to broaden our reach. We will be doing focus groups with community-based organizations, environmental sustainability nonprofits, and industry in particular, because we have some good ties with with our environmental and sustainability partners and some of our community-based friends, but the industry sector is one that we don't normally work within, so we really want to get their insights into what greenhouse gas mitigation measures we might consider for that sector. And then continuing to expand our reach, we are happy to provide partners with printed materials, newsletter, and social media blurbs, talking points, etc. If you are involved in an organization and you're having a meeting or you've got a newsletter or you're going to be tabling an event and you might want to include this, we welcome those opportunities to work with you and help expand our reach through the work that you're already doing out there. So please be in touch if you have some ideas for how to do that. And then we are working on an Atlanta MSA-wide survey that will be done similar to what the state did for the PCAT. We'll do one and focus in on the MSA area this time. So those things are coming up. And we'll move on to next steps. So again, here's the timeline. We are working our way through the deliverable requirements for the MOCAP over the next several months. By the end of this year, we hope to have a comprehensive list of measures across all sectors that we will then hand over to a partner to calculate the greenhouse gas potential next spring. That takes quite a bit of time to make those calculations, both near term and long term, and then do the projections based upon the plan implementation. So that's coming up as far as requirements. We will have our next stakeholder meeting on December 17th at 1:30. That will be posted again on the public input site and the ERC website. And just plan on having touch them with us every other month through June. Again, we want to hear from you and your community. We always want to know what you're thinking, any ideas you may have, any opportunities for expanding our reach or partnering with others. Again, just to recap, we have our public input website, the community visioning survey, the climate priorities survey, upcoming webinars for stakeholders, past presentations available. You can sign up for updates and request a speaker on this public input website. That is the QR code here and the URL. And then please feel free to share this far and wide with friends and family. And we also, beyond the Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan, have a lot of great things going on in relation to climate change and resilience here at ARC. So we invite you to take a look at our climate change page at atlantaregional.org/climate change. And if you have any specific questions and want to email us, the best way to do that is to email climate@atlantaregional.org. So best get in touch with us. And with that, I'll close out the webinar part or the presentation part of our webinar. And that leaves us plenty of time for questions and answers. And while I stop sharing my screen so I can actually see some of these questions and answers, I'll try to bring the PowerPoint up again in another way. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, John Folksborn.
Thanks, Crystal. One second. Thanks, Crystal and Shelby. Great presentation as always. And just what I'm going to be doing, as we've done in previous calls, is going through the chat to read out loud any of the questions that were put in. So as I start in on that, just a reminder that if any person on the call has a question that they would like answered, please write it in the chat and we'll get to it. So the first question comes from Patrick. Do the business as usual greenhouse gas projections account for the existing and planned data centers operating in the metro area? Crystal or Shelby?
Shelby, I don't know that we have that, but I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I would. Some more digging in the NIMS model, so the National Energy Model. It could be likely, depending on the regional model, but that's one that I would want to confirm with the Drawdown Georgia team.
Okay, so it sounds like we'll add that to our list of questions for the Drawdown Georgia team when it comes to projections.
Very good. And just to note that Shelby has put several links in the chat as well. Anne has let folks know that there is a forum on November 9th about sustainability in healthcare for any ARC or other people who want to attend. It's placed the link. Anne, thank you very much. Henry has said, I'd like to know the model is updated with the Georgia Power updates of the IRP. Perhaps as a question, Crystal, Shelby, can we confirm that the model is updated with the Georgia Power updates of the IRP? That's probably getting back to drawdown.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think that's another question for Drawdown Georgia, similar to the data center power, which the data center power is related to the updated IRP, I believe. So might be two birds, one stone question.
Very good. Thank you. Patrick has said, in the event it's not included in the model, do you all think it merits tracking down these emissions to include in any planning? If that's in reference to the data centers, I can let you know, Patrick, that is something that we would take into consideration. And I think there's many different parts of ARC that are taking a look at the increase or projected increase in data centers occurring throughout the region and trying to find concrete information to incorporate into planning. So this is something that is of interest to us as well, and that we are considering how that can be incorporated. See, Anne has a question. Do you know if hospitals and medical offices are included in the commercial sector of the projections?
Yes, Shelby, you can verify, but the commercial sector does include hospitals and medical offices. It's all
Yes.
commercial type buildings.
Yes, that's right.
Very good. Doug has said, within the ARC, are there plans for advocacy at the Georgia General Assembly to try and meet the goals? I would say that if what we're asking for here, Doug, is meet the climate action plan goals, while we do not have plans for advocacy at the Georgia General Assembly, part of our outreach and engagement with partners, stakeholders, and specifically local governments is to try to empower and enable them to do the reductions that Crystal and Shelby are talking about. So we are not directly advocating, but we are trying to use the powers that we have and our abilities to kind of help make the change at the local level.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting that, John. And just to expand, the plan what we're envisioning the plan as is a roadmap or a guide for all sorts of organizations, local governments, churches, and others, businesses, that they can use this plan if they're not going to do their own climate action planning, to be able to look at the plan and figure out what within the plan they can do themselves. And so not only will the plan outline the measures, what they are, what the potential reduction is, it would also tell people what gives the biggest bang for their buck when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It will also tie into other federal funding opportunities that they might tap into. And then you might have noticed in the timeline in between when the plan is submitted the end of next year and the update in 2027, there's kind of a lull in deliverables. And so during that time, we envision taking some of these implementation ideas on the road and engaging those that are interested in learning more about how they can implement some of these actions, doing some technical assistance and education around that. And, of course, this plan can also be leveraged by our NGOs and others that traditionally do advocacy at the state capitol. They can leverage it however they like in their own ways.
That's right. That's right. Thanks for that, Crystal. Thanks for the question. Lynn has asked, was one of the reduction measures identified community solar? Is community solar a viable option in Georgia?
There are some organizations that have been looking at community solar, especially in the right-of-ways here in Metro Atlanta. The Ray is one such organization that we've been discussing this with. So it is viable, and we are most likely going to continue to include it as an option in the Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan.
Very good. And Dana, I apologize, has made the comment in response to Doug that she would like to talk with any groups coordinating that. And I think that is in reference to advocacy at the Georgia state level. So thanks for that. If anyone has any other comments or questions, please do put them in the chat. We'll stay on for a bit. Henry has taken that call. Metro area is served by multiple EMCs as well as Georgia Power. have you considered the possibility of, quote, virtual power plants, end quote?
We have not yet considered that, but I'm adding it to the list of possibilities.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Further, are there any laws you would ask local governments or the legislature to enact? Ooh, that's a good one.
I imagine there may be some discussion of code revisions that might be more energy efficient. There possibly could be changes to planning ordinances or development standards to maybe include more trees. Those are the types of things, the things that local governments can do that we already recommend for our Green Communities program that we would most likely include in this plan. And yeah, so I think we don't necessarily, we'd include them as a possibility. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. I think that's well said. Policies and other similar types of recommendations are likely things that we can consider. Okay, Drew has asked, which municipalities seem to be most motivated to work for these sustainability goals?
At this time, I would say we have, I think, just over 20 to maybe 23 local governments that are certified as green communities. That's an ARC voluntary green certification program that's been going on for about 15 or so years. I would say those are most likely suspects, but that doesn't mean that there aren't local governments out there that are motivated to work towards these sustainability goals. They just may not have had the time to stop and put together a plan, which this plan will help them do. And, they might not have the staff yet dedicated to work towards the goals. But I think there's many more local governments out there than are participating in our Green Communities program that are interested in becoming more sustainable, both within their operations and fleets and within their broader communities.
Yeah, I would double down on that and say that between Crystal and Shelby and our other colleagues here at ARC, as we've been working on the Priority Climate Action Plan and now the Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan and going out and talking with local governments, we have heard almost unanimous interest and support for the different initiatives and strategies within the plan. So I think there's great motivation across all local governments in the region. Most local governments in the region. Leroy has said, are there environmental related template resolutions for municipals to use?
I'm not exactly sure. We do have resolutions that our local governments have used, either to create a sustainability policy of multiple different features or to say they want to become a green community. So we do have those templates. We also have examples for how to create other green policies and ordinances just within our Green Communities program already.
Thanks for that. Okay. Henry has said, are you including the possibility of increased growth from, quote, climate refugees, end quote? We gained thousands after Katrina who moved from New Orleans. How many more will move from Florida? And I will let Crystal respond as well, but I just want to remind that while this plan certainly considers population in some forms, it really is focused on strategies to reduce carbon pollution. And so, we think about, again, population for the region in some forms for this, but aren't really thinking about kind of all impacts of climate change, like climate refugees, trying to think through that in other forms of ARC's work program. Crystal, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's totally correct. We have a pretty robust data and analytics group here at ARC, and that is one of the questions that's top of mind for them. And they are trying to determine the best way to calculate the potential increased growth from climate refugees. So they are currently looking at that. I don't know that it's something that we would have in time to be able to consider within the plan, but please know that this isn't our one and only plan. We envision we will update this in the future. In addition, we may have in the future at ARC a plan that looks at climate resilience. So this looks at greenhouse gas emissions reductions, like John said. And so there's the possibility of having a broader, more comprehensive climate resilience plan for the region in the future. And that question would definitely be key for that plan.
A good question. Okay. That has exhausted the chat for the moment. Again, thank you to Crystal and Shelby. We can stay on for a few minutes, but appreciate everyone taking the time to join and listen. And do take Crystal up on the ways to engage and reach out through our websites, our email address, or directly to her, or the QR codes that were posted.
Okay, and I'll share those slides one more time. I can get it to go backwards. All right. Well, I think that will conclude the stakeholder webinar number 2 for the Metro Atlanta Climate Action Plan. Thank you all for taking your time today to spend it with us and learn more about the plan. As always, if you have any additional questions or ideas or potential ways that we can partner with you, please reach out to us. Again, the best way to reach us is at climate@atlantaregional.org. I'll put that in the chat. And Lauren, thank you for posting the website for our climate work as well. And we'll see you hopefully in December.
Thanks, Crystal. Thanks, Shelby. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everybody.